At Christmas dinner, Mom announced proudly, "We told everyone you failed med school. It was just too embarrassing to explain." I stood up slowly and said, "That's odd. Since I graduated top of my class 2 weeks ago." My aunt's jaw dropped. "My name's Nia, I'm 32, and I think I've reached the point where I don't need my parents' approval anymore, but that doesn't mean their words don't still sting." My mom, Marta, was the queen of making disappointment sound like concern. Everything in our family was always about how things looked to other people. We weren't poor growing up, but my parents put most of their energy into appearing well off. Designer bags on layaway, leased cars with maxed out payments, and above all else, two perfectly presentable daughters. That was Leela and me. Leela, the golden one, followed the path exactly. Got into dental hygiene straight out of high school, got engaged to a real estate agent by 25, and bought a condo with white countertops and beige furniture that's never been sat on. Me, I was always the stubborn one, the reader, the thinker, the one who wanted to help people. I told my parents I wanted to be a doctor when I was 16, and my mom nearly choked on her wine. "A doctor?" she asked. "That's not realistic for someone like you." She said it like she was offering me kindness. "You're too emotional, Nia. You'd fall apart after the first patient died." Dad, Dennis, added his 2 cents. "Besides medical school, the money alone, and you're not a math person." Never mind that I had a 3.9 GPA, volunteered at a hospital, and scored in the 98th percentile on the MCAT. All they saw was risk and shame. If I failed, I'd reflect badly on them. If I succeeded without their help, I'd make them look unnecessary. So I kept my acceptance letter to myself. Northwestern had offered me a spot at Feinberg School of Medicine. I had worked like hell to get it, but I didn't say a word to my parents. Over the next 4 years, we had sparse contact, surface-level conversations. My parents liked to talk about Leela's latest engagement photos, her friend circle, the condo. They didn't ask about me much, and I didn't offer. I worked weekends at a bookstore and evenings as a campus research assistant. I took out loans and stayed up until 3 a.m. studying pathology and physiology. I had classmates whose parents paid for their rent and car insurance, but I took the train everywhere and lived in a crumbling apartment above a nail salon on Clark Street. I told myself it was temporary, that the price of independence was isolation, that when I walked across that stage at graduation, it would all be worth it. And it was, sort of. 2 weeks before Christmas, I graduated top of my class, honors. Commendation from the dean. A faculty member even pulled me aside after the ceremony and said, "You're going to change lives, Dr. Castellano." I cried in the parking garage for 15 minutes after that. And then I went back to my small, quiet apartment and sat on the edge of my bed wondering if I should tell them. I thought about calling my mom, just saying it flat out. "I'm a doctor now." But I could hear her voice in my head. "Oh. Well, I suppose we'll have to change the story we told the Alvarados then." So I didn't call. I didn't even text. I did, however, decide I'd show up to Christmas dinner. That year, dinner was at Aunt Cecilia's house in Naperville. The type of house that had a staircase no one actually used and white carpet in the formal living room. The kind of house where the wine was labeled, estate bottled, and the kids were shushed constantly. I hadn't been in that house in nearly 5 years, but as I walked in with the casserole I brought out of guilt, more than anything, I could feel every eye flick to me and then quickly away. Leela greeted me with an air kiss. Her fiancé, Jordan, gave me a brief nod, and my mom waved vaguely from across the room like I was someone she vaguely recognized from church. Dinner was what you'd expect. Too many side dishes, polite laughter, kids complaining about the food. And then, somewhere between the green beans and the ham, my mother decided to drop the grenade. She turned toward the table, wine glass in hand, and said in a light, airy voice, "We told everyone Nia didn't get into med school. It was just too embarrassing to explain." Just like that, like it was nothing, like she hadn't just erased 4 of the hardest years of my life. I froze. I looked around the table. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Cecilia looked confused. Leela pressed her lips together, and I just stood up. "That's odd," I said slowly. "Since I graduated top of my class 2 weeks ago." Silence. You could hear the tick of the kitchen timer in the background. My mother blinked. "Oh," she said, almost pleasantly. "Well, why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never cared," I wanted to say. Because when I did tell you what I wanted, you told me not to bother. But I didn't say any of that. I looked at my plate, then the people I had shared a last name with my whole life. Because I knew you'd find a way to make it about you anyway. And I left. I didn't eat dessert. I didn't hug anyone. I walked out of that house into the cold night air with no gloves on and snow in my shoes. I went home to my apartment. I poured myself a glass of the cheap wine I had in the fridge. And I sat there, stunned that even after all of it, even after proving them wrong, there was still no joy. No moment where the people who should have loved me most finally did. The days that followed were quiet, eerily so. I didn't expect an apology, not really. But some part of me, some childish hope still tucked into the corners of my ribcage, thought maybe I'd wake up to a text, a voicemail, anything acknowledging what happened. Instead, my phone remained silent. The family group chat, once so busy with emoji-laden chatter about holiday menus and Leela's wedding plans, was dormant. Not even a passive-aggressive meme from Aunt Cecilia. Just nothing. The next week at the clinic felt surreal. I returned to work as if nothing had happened, walking into our South Side practice in my white coat with Dr. N. Castellano embroidered on the pocket, clipboard in hand, ready to review patient charts. But something was different. I found myself staring too long at the old Christmas card taped to the break room fridge, a family photo from 3 years ago. Everyone is smiling. Everyone is pretending. That's all it had ever been. On the Thursday after Christmas, I got an email. It wasn't from my parents. It was from my cousin Daniela, Cecilia's daughter. We weren't close growing up. She'd been part of the Golden Circle, one of the respectable cousins who had played tennis and dated boys from acceptable neighborhoods. But the subject line was short. I'm sorry. The body of the email was even shorter. Didn't know what your mom said. Wanted you to know that what you did was badass. Hope we can catch up sometime. I stared at that email for a long time. It wasn't grand. It wasn't dramatic. But it was the first time someone from my family had acknowledged the truth. That I had done something hard. That I deserved more than silence. I replied briefly, thank you. Said I was open to grabbing coffee in the new year. But of course, things couldn't stay still forever. On New Year's Day, my phone buzzed with a message from my dad. Not a call. He hadn't called me in years, but a short, clipped text. Your mother is very upset about Christmas. She feels disrespected. You should apologize for how you handled that. I remember laughing. Out loud. A sharp, humorless bark that startled my upstairs neighbor's cat, who frequently visited my window ledge. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the locked drawer in my desk and pulled out a thin folder I'd kept for years. Inside were the old documents. My Northwestern acceptance letter, my residency offer, my graduation program. I didn't know why I'd saved them. Maybe I'd always assumed I'd one day show them to my parents like receipts, like proof of a debt owed. But looking at them now, they felt like relics of another life. Of a version of me who still wanted them to be proud. The next message didn't come from my father or mother. It came from Leela. She texted me one night around 11 p.m. Are you free to talk? It wasn't like her. Leela never reached out first. She didn't call unless there was a bridal shower to organize or a recipe to ask about. And we hadn't had a real conversation since college. Still, something about the timing, how late it was, made me reply. She called 2 minutes later. Her voice was quieter than usual, less polished. I didn't know they said that, she said before I could say hello. I swear to God, Nia. I had no idea what Mom was going to say at dinner. I sat on my bed, blanket half draped around my shoulders. They've been saying you dropped out, she continued. For years, like it was some family fact. I thought maybe you'd had a breakdown or something and just didn't want to talk about it. I didn't speak. I'm not defending them, she added quickly. I'm just saying they were convincing. You know how they are. Mom said you moved on and didn't want to be contacted, that it was your choice. I laughed again, but it was quieter this time. So you believed her, I said. There was a pause. I didn't know what else to believe, Leela replied. And I guess I didn't want to ask. There it was, the real truth. No one wanted to rock the boat. It was easier to pretend I'd disappeared than confront why. We talked for a long time that night, more than we had in years. She told me she hated the pressure of being perfect, that sometimes she felt like a Barbie doll living someone else's dream. That Jordan, her fiancé, wasn't sure he even wanted kids anymore, and that their condo felt more like a hotel than a home. I told her about med school, about the long nights and the smells of the anatomy lab, about the patient who died during my third year and how I couldn't stop dreaming about his wife's scream, about how I got so tired, sometimes I sat in the hospital stairwell just to breathe. We weren't close yet, but something shifted that night, like we'd both peeked behind the curtain of our curated lives and finally seen each other. Still, my parents didn't reach out, not even when Leela told them I'd called her. Not when she told them, gently, that they owed me an apology. Instead, they doubled down. They said you humiliated them, she texted me a week later. That you should have warned them. Warned them. I'd been gone for nearly a decade. They didn't know where I lived, what I did, who I spent time with, and they still thought I owed them something, a heads up before dismantling their fiction. It was the final confirmation I needed. They didn't want me. They wanted the idea of me safe, silent, absent, so I made a decision. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't write a dramatic email cutting them off. I simply stopped showing up. To dinners, for the holidays, to birthdays and showers and photo ops. If they wanted silence, I'd finally give them what they pretended I'd already chosen. But this time, it would be on my terms. The absence grew louder than the drama ever had. Weeks turned to months. I didn't hear from my mother, and my father only sent one more message. A passive-aggressive, "hope you're well," which was less a genuine sentiment and more a guilt grenade lobbed from a distance. I didn't reply. Instead, I focused on my work. My clinic was in the heart of Bronzeville, and I loved it. The patients were real people with real problems, not rich suburbanites looking for second opinions on Google diagnoses. We dealt with everything: chronic illness, underserved youth, mental health crises, and the days were long but meaningful. And slowly, the weight I'd carried all my life started to feel lighter. I didn't miss family dinners. I didn't miss forced smiles over ham and condescension. I didn't miss pretending. But revenge, I've learned, doesn't always come in dramatic packages. Sometimes it's soft, quiet, a culmination of subtle shifts that all add up to justice. Mine came about 6 months after Christmas, in the most unexpected of places: a gala. It was hosted by the Chicago Women in Medicine Association. One of my professors had nominated me for an award, Emerging Physician Leader of the Year. I hadn't even known until I received the formal email weeks before the event. My first reaction was to decline, but then I thought about how far I'd come, about the long nights, the failure my parents fabricated, the silence I endured. I accepted. The night of the gala, I wore a simple navy gown and pinned my badge over my chest with quiet pride. The banquet hall sparkled, full of people who knew what I'd accomplished and didn't need to be convinced. As I stood backstage waiting to be introduced, I scanned the crowd. And there they were, Marta and Dennis, front and center at one of the sponsor tables. It took me a second to process what I was seeing. Then I saw the banner draped over the stage, sponsored in part by the Alvarado Foundation. Of course, my parents' country club friends, they must have donated, must have had no idea who the night's honorees were. I felt my stomach twist, but not with fear. It was something else. Something that felt a lot like control. When the announcer read my name, followed by a glowing summary of my work, I stepped onto the stage with a calm I didn't expect to possess. Flashbulbs, applause, my name is echoing over the speaker system. I didn't make eye contact with them. Not yet. I gave my speech. Thanked my mentors, my patients, and the young women who felt like they didn't belong in rooms like this. I said the words I needed to hear at 24. If someone tells you you're not cut out for something, don't argue. Let your life be the evidence. The room stood up, applauded, some even wiped tears. And then, as I stepped off stage and accepted handshakes and compliments, I walked straight to their table. Marta's eyes were wide, glossy with disbelief. My father cleared his throat, eyes darting around like he needed an escape route. "Nia," my mother finally managed, rising from her seat. "We didn't know, we didn't realize," I smiled, but not kindly. "You didn't want to know," I said, "and you never cared enough to ask." She faltered, reaching for some thread of grace. "Well, this is quite the surprise. You've done well for yourself." I leaned in slightly, voice low. "I've done exceptionally well," I said, "and I did it with zero help from the people who were supposed to believe in me first." I turned to go, then paused. "Oh, and by the way," I added, "you might want to rethink what story you tell the Alvarados next time. Looks like they support my work now. That was the cherry on top. The Alvarado Foundation board chair was a former professor of mine, someone who had seen me in clinic, had mentored me, and was now shaking hands with me across the gala floor. I left them sitting there, humiliated in their own playground of status and social currency, and I felt light. Leela and I, though, we began rebuilding something real. She started visiting the clinic, sitting in on educational outreach programs. She even decided to go back to school to study public health. We weren't best friends, but we were allies. For the first time, we were women who had faced the same pressure and chosen something different, something better. As for my parents, I haven't heard from them since that night, and I don't need to. I learned the hard way that revenge doesn't have to be cruel. It doesn't have to burn bridges or scream in someone's face. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living the life they said you couldn't, with your head high and their jaws on the floor.